Hello and welcome to the lesson. This is Lisa, the tutor gal, helping someone with an Algebra 1 word problem. So let's go ahead and read the problem. Francisca has a total of 10 coins in her pocket. All of them are nickels and dimes. If the value of the coins is 85 cents, how many dimes does she have? Okay, so they're asking for how many dimes. So we want to keep that in mind. So let's see how we would solve this. They told us we are working with nickels and dimes. Okay, nickels and dimes. So that's two unknowns, or we call them two variables. So if somebody uses the word unknowns, they really mean variables. If they use the word variables, they're talking about unknowns. So that's two unknowns, and we'll call them N and D. Okay. They also told us a number total of 10. So they told us that the total number of coins is 10. So I'm calling that a number total. So they told us a number total of 10. They also told us a money total of 85 cents. The value of the coins is 85 cents. So they gave us a number total and a money total. That right there is kind of your tip-off, and we'll see why. Since we have two unknowns, nickels and dimes, we need to set up a system of two equations because we can't solve an equation with two unknowns. We have to know at least the value of one of them. So when that happens, we set up a system. And since we have two unknowns here, we're going to set up a system of two equations. And luckily, they gave us two totals that we can make our two equations from. So a system of two equations helps us solve a problem with two unknowns. Let's set up our two equations for number and money. Okay. For the number equation, let n equal the number of nickels. So that's important. N is representing the number of nickels, not the value of the nickel or anything like that. N is representing the number of nickels. How many nickels are in her pocket? And let D equal the number of dimes. How many dimes are in her pocket? So in our equations, wherever you see N, that represents a number of nickels. So if there's like 5 nickels in her pocket, then that's what N is representing. But we don't know yet what the actual number is, but we're just going to assign N to the number of nickels and D to the number of dimes. So here's our first equation. So the number of nickels plus the number of dimes equals 10 total, because they told us a number total of 10. They gave us a number total. They said there's 10. So that's our first equation. And the first equation in a system is usually simple like that. And the first equation in a system is usually the number equation. So, because those are usually simpler. So then for the money equation, we have to actually assign value to each of the coins. So we have to know what's a nickel worth, what's a dime worth. We have to assign value because we're talking money. So, and we know what a nickel is worth and what a dime is worth, so we're good. A nickel is worth 5 cents. Or in math, we write it like this. $0.05. That means 5 100ths. That's really what a nickel is. So when you see it like this, just know that's 5 cents. Because remember, cents means like century, 100. Cents means per 100. And this 5 is in the hundredths place. So this just means 5 cents. So this is what we'll use. And we're going to keep the dollar sign in all the way through, just so we don't forget that this is a money amount. It's kind of a pain, I know, to keep that dollar sign in, but it's better to do so. So a nickel is worth 5 cents, or $0.5, I guess. And a dime is worth 10 cents, or 0.10, or 10 100ths, or, $0.10, or what have you. But that's how we write it. So they told us we have 5 cents a certain number of times, plus 10 cents a certain number of times, that equal 85 cents altogether. So that's basically what they told us. We have nickels, a certain number of nickels, and a certain number of dimes that equal 85 cents. So our equation is 5 cents. There's our 5 cents, a certain number of times. That's what our N is, because remember, N stands for the number of nickels. So I'm saying number of times, but this is just in general. How many nickels? And we have 10 cents a certain number of times. Remember, D stands for the number of dimes. And together, this money amount, remember, when you multiply money so many times, like if I had 10 cents 5 times, I'd have 10 cents times 5. So I'd have 5 dimes there. It'd be 50 cents. So my answer would be a money amount. Same thing here. So 5 cents N times plus 10 cents D times equals 85 cents. So there's our two equations highlighted in yellow. We have a number equation, N plus D equals 10. That's 10 total. And we have a money equation. 5 cents n times plus 10 cents d times equals 85 cents. To solve this, we have to have just one unknown, meaning one variable. We can't solve this, like we can't solve it for d, because we have this n here. I mean, sure, we could solve it for d in terms of n, but that just gives us an answer with a variable in it. We need a concrete constant, a number, a solid number, which they call a constant in math. So we have to try to get this down to just one variable. Well, how do we do that? Well, so here's what we do. We describe one of the variables in terms of the other. But which one? So we describe either d in terms of nickels. So here's this, we say d equals 10 minus n. Or we describe n in terms of d, and we say n equals 10 minus d. Well, which one should we use? Well, since they're asking for number of dimes, let's describe a nickel in terms of a dime, so that we could get rid of the nickel. So here's how we do it. Let's apply this to the simpler equation. We don't really want to apply it to this equation. That's too hard. It's not going to help us. This is easy. So our simpler equation, n plus d, I rewrote it down here, becomes, how do we get rid of the d? Well, we add a negative d to both sides, or we subtract d from both sides, however you want to look at it. So if we subtract d from this side, we get, let me just write it. Too bad I didn't add an extra space here, but I'll just say I'm adding a negative d to both sides. So a negative d to both sides. So negative d and positive d just is 0. So we get n equals 10 minus d. Remember, when you do the same thing to both sides, you still have an equal equation. You're still balanced. So now n equals 10 minus d. We've described n in terms of d. So now, wherever we see n in this big equation, we put in 10 minus d. So here's n. We put in 10 minus d here. Then the whole equation will just be in terms of one variable, d. So let's see how we do that. So I'm just stating it again. So now in our money equation, this one, we can just replace n with 10 minus d and then solve for d, which is the number of dimes. Remember, we're solving for d. D is the number of dimes, and that's what they're asking for. How many? The number of dimes. Number of dimes. All right, well, we're getting somewhere. So let's go ahead and do that. So I started it up here. So we're going to take this equation. So I'll just rewrite that equation. So here it is. 5 cents times n. So 5 cents n times plus 10 cents d times equals 85 cents. I just rewrote it. Now here's where we're going to substitute. Anywhere we see n, we're going to put in 10 minus d down here. So here's an n. So I'm just plopping 10 minus d in for n. And of course we have to use parentheses because in math, that shows that we're going to multiply this entire expression within the parentheses. We're going to multiply this by the 0.05. You know, we have to use the distributive property. So 0.05 times 10 minus 0.05 times d. So that's what we're going to do in the next step. So everything here is just the same, of course. So using the distributive property, 0.05 times 10, well, it's kind of easy because when you multiply something by 10, you're just taking your decimal and moving it a tenth. So in other words, 5 cents, if you had a nickel 10 times, well, you'd have 50 cents. And this is where people get, I would say, where somebody would make a mistake right here. This 0.05 times 10 is just 0.5. But remember, there's an imaginary zero after that. So now it looks like 50 cents, okay? Don't forget about that. Because when we start combining like terms, we want to remember that this isn't 0.05 anymore. It's 0.50. And then there's our minus sign there. I kind of hid the minus sign, so. Okay. So 0.05 times 10 is 0.50. And then 0.05 times a negative d, because remember the negative sign, is negative, and I just put it here, 0.05d. So that's easy. We just plopped the d on the end. We know that means multiply. And then these are just repeated again. So now it's just a matter of combining like terms and isolating the d and so on. The d is the number of dimes, remember. So we'll go ahead and see the next step is where we combined these d's. So we left this one as is, and if you notice, I put the 0 on just so that we don't forget. So this is just repeated, and then these two are combined. So we have a negative 0.05. So we basically have a negative nickel plus a dime. So you can do it in your calculator, or you could just think of it as nickels and dimes or what have you. So basically we have 10 cents, because this is positive, minus 5 cents. Well, 10 cents minus 5 cents is 5 cents. Positive 5 cents. So this little negative and so on can really get you messed up. And the reason why I'm keeping everything in decimals is because we're talking about money, you know. So just, I don't know. I think it just helps to think of it as money. as we look at it. So now we combined our like terms. I just repeated the 0.85. Now let's try and isolate this d somehow. Well, all I did was say, okay, I can't just isolate this d yet, but I can isolate this entire term by adding a negative 0.50 to both sides. I'll just put it here, and I'll go in red. So if I added a negative, it's just like subtracting. If I subtracted, and I won't put the dollar sign point because I don't have enough room, sorry. 0.5, a negative 0.5 to this side, and then a negative 0.5 to this side. Well, this side just becomes 0. 50 cents minus 50 cents. I guess I should put the dollar sign in. So that just becomes 0. So these just go away. And then on this side, we have 85 cents minus 50 cents. Well, 85 cents minus 50 cents is just 35 cents. So now we can isolate the d by dividing both sides of the equation by 0.05. So let's go ahead and do that. So 0.05d divided by 0.05 is just 1, because anything over itself is 1. So this is just 1 times d, which is just d. And remember, we have to divide this side by 0.05. So if I divided this side by 0.05, well, 35 cents divided by 5 cents is just 7. And it's a number. It's not a dollar amount. And that's why I like to leave the dollar signs in, because just as, 0.05 over 0.05 is the number 1, anything over itself is the number 1. Even a dollar over a dollar, you can think of it in your head. Well, that's just a 1, and 1 times anything is itself. So these dollar signs go away. So that's why it's always a good idea to keep your units. We call these units. I mean, right now it's dollars are our units, but it could be inches, it could be feet, it could be millimeters, ounces, anything. When you get into chemistry, it'll be moles. So it's good to have your units. So the number of dimes is 7. Well, let's check our work. Check this number with the number equation. That's this one. N plus d equals 10. Well, we said d was 7. So n plus 7 equals 10. Okay. So that would mean if we subtracted a 7 from both sides, we'll just do it like this. We'll say we're adding a negative 7, and here's a negative 7. Well, negative 7 plus positive 7 is 0. So we're left with n, and 10 minus 7 is 3. So the number of nickels would be 3. Okay, so we have 3 nickels and 7 dimes. Does that add up to 85 cents like they told us down here? Well, let's see. Does that, I'm repeating myself, sorry. Does that make sense? Let's see. 3 nickels plus 7 dimes. Does that equal 85 cents? Well, 3 nickels, a nickel is worth 5 cents. See, we got our worth now, so I put my dollar sign in. Plus 7 dimes. So it's like this is the N now, and this is the D. We replaced them. Plus 7 dimes, a dime is worth 10 cents. Does that equal 85 cents? Well, let's see. 3 times 5 cents, 5 cents 3 times is 15 cents. 10 cents 7 times is 70 cents. Does 15 cents plus 70 cents equal 85 cents? It sure does. So it looks like we got the right answer. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So there you go. So she has 7 dimes and she has 3 nickels. They didn't ask for that, but we kind of figured it out because we had to check our work. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. And you can always sign up for a lesson with me anytime, and we can go over some more fun math problems. Have a great day. Bye.